You're listening to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast, episode 144. Welcome to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. I'm your host, Paula Price, lawyer turned certified executive coach. This podcast was created to empower women lawyers just like you to create a life and practice you love. Join me every week for a break from the hustle so we can focus on you, what you truly want, and how you can create it. If you're over the overwhelm, done with putting out fires, and ready to redefine success on your own terms, you're in the right place. Ready for today's episode? Let's dive in. Have you ever asked yourself what a perfect week would look like for you? Now, maybe your mind goes to you, sitting on the sand, underneath the shade of a gorgeous palm tree, reading your favorite book and sipping on a glass of mineral water. And yes, that would be a pretty dreamy way to spend your week. But what I'm talking about here today is your work week. Have you ever thought about what a perfect work week would look like for you? One where you feel like you're in control, one where you feel like you're being really productive, one where you have a plan and you follow through on the plan. And by the time you get to the end of the week, you feel maybe a little bit tired, but also satisfied. You've done what you set out to do and you did it in a way that was not overly stressful and that feels sustainable. If you are wanting to figure out how to create weeks that really align with what you want, weeks that feel good in your practice, then you are absolutely in the right place, because that's what we're diving into in today's podcast episode. Now, I wanted to extend a shout out to a client of mine, someone who I just started working with, who was the inspiration for today's podcast topic. We were having a discussion about her practice. She's a relatively junior lawyer. She's 2 or 3 years into her practice, and she's built up a really successful solo practice. And where she's at now is having exerted a lot of effort and energy to create a practice that is now generating a lot of work. She's got clients, she's got processes, she's got systems, and she's also got this challenge that I know so many of you can relate to, of having your professional work and wanting more balance in your life, right? So for this particular client, we were taking a step back, we were looking at the big picture, and we got to the point where we started talking about the granularity of week to week, and we ran out of time. I said, you know what? I really should create a podcast episode for you. And that is exactly what I'm doing. Because I think for all of you, for all of us, yes, we can have these aspirational dreams of what we want things to look like. And the way that we bring those dreams to fruition is by having systems, by having a strategy, so that week after week, we are building toward those dreams. So where do lawyers often struggle? I mean, yes, I'm talking about the aspirational, but there's also a real struggle that happens in the day-to-day. So for many lawyers that I work with, there's this feeling of being on, right? You're on duty, you're on call, you've got your phone, you know that a client email could come in at any minute, and it's really hard to turn off work. Maybe you've had a really stressful day, you're working on a really complex problem, you're in the middle of a negotiation, and you're sitting across from your partner having dinner, and they've just told you an entire story and you haven't heard a word of it, because physically you're present, but mentally you're somewhere else. You may find that even being physically present with your partner, with your loved ones, with your children, with your friends, that becomes an issue because you're physically unavailable. You're at the office working on something and you aren't able to attend certain events. You might find that you're canceling dinner plans. You might find that while you are at your practice, right, while you're at work, whether you're working in an office, whether you're working at home, or a hybrid combination of both, you might find that your days feel really reactive. So you might find you get into the office and you have plans to work on project A, but then you've got these emails that are coming in that are pulling you away from your project. And so you spend your day playing whack-a-mole, responding to emails, client requests, things that come up. Maybe somebody pops into your office, they want to chat about something, and your day flies by without you checking the things off your to-do list. And so you need to stay late to make up for that lost time, or things don't get done. And what you can then feel is that you feel really behind, you feel really stressed out. It's really uncertain to you how you're going to get things done. And so that creates this unease and overwhelm. These are really, really common challenges. Lawyers that I work with often feel like this just isn't a sustainable pace, that they're going to burn out, that their practice runs them and not the other way around. You might find that you get caught up in busy work. So you've got these projects that you're trying to complete and you get interrupted. But when you look at the interruptions and you look at what you have to show for it at the end of the day, what you see is that it's a lot of busy work. It's not necessarily billable. It doesn't necessarily move the dial forward. Again, you start feeling stressed. You start thinking of yourself as being behind. And then sometimes you start to feel resentful of the work that you're doing. Maybe it's a non-billable project, a committee that you're sitting on, a pro bono file you've taken on, additional mentorship that you're trying to do. You feel resentful because all that, as much as you want to do it, as much as you see the value, it's taking you away from the absolute essentials. And what you might also find is that you, on some level, wish that you had a time management system. You wish you had a way of scheduling. Maybe you've tried schedules. Maybe you've bought day planners. Maybe you've tried systems. Maybe you've read all the things you can find online. You may even have asked ChatGPT to create a dream schedule for you. And yet what you find is that you never stick to the schedule because you just don't see the point. You put a schedule in place and then things go sideways. Somebody interrupts you. The tasks that you had that you wanted to do, maybe they get canceled or you get new tasks, etc. And so you find that you don't have an official system. You don't have a way of scheduling your time. And so you, in a sense, don't think of yourself as having a system. Maybe you don't see the point. But what I'm inviting you to consider today is that no matter where you are, whether you have a system or not, you do have a system. It may just be that the system that you're using is not one that you've come to with intentionality, right? It's just one that you kind of do by default. So what I'm inviting you to do is to take a step back and see the big picture, right? We've kind of given you some examples of what it can feel like to be in a really busy practice where you don't feel in control. And what I invite you to think about here is you're managing your time somehow. I mean, you've managed to reach a certain level of success where you are right now. So there are things that you're doing that are absolutely working. We want to acknowledge and recognize you for that. But what you might find is that you lack that sense of control over your time. You feel like you're at the mercy of your practice and you might feel exhausted. You might feel overworked. You feel like you're constantly busy. But when you look at what you have to show for it, the numbers don't add up, right? If you're on a billable hours system, you might find you spend your day at the office and yet you've been there for 10 hours, but only 5 of those hours are billable hours and you want to have a higher ratio of billable time relative to time spent. It might find that your revenue generated isn't keeping up. It isn't commensurate with the amount of effort and time that you are investing. And you might find that the combination of all of this leads to a general sense of not feeling the sense of satisfaction with your career that you wish that you felt at the stage that you are at. So what you want is to feel calm. When you approach your work week, you want to feel confident that you're going to do the things that you need to do to move the dial forward, that you're going to do that with productivity, that you're going to do that with confidence, and not feeling overwhelmed, not feeling at the mercy of what's going on around you. And that is exactly what we are focusing on in today's podcast episode, specifically by helping you design your perfect week. Now, when it comes to designing your perfect week, as I mentioned earlier, there are often objections to why it is that you might want to sit down and create a plan. Number one is that it takes time to create a plan. And you might find that you're so busy that you don't have time to sit down and create a plan. And if you are so busy that you don't have time to create a plan, then I would invite you to rethink that. You probably are so busy that you need to have a plan, that you need to have a way of organizing all the various things that you have on your to-do list, whether it's an actual to-do list or a mental one. that you need to spend that time planning. But often that's a reason why lawyers don't want to plan. It takes time and you're busy. You don't have that time. And the other reason that I mentioned earlier is that you create that plan, but that plan gets sidetracked. Something comes in that is unexpected, that is urgent. And so you have to throw your plan to the side, and it can be really hard to come back to. And what I'd offer to you is that when you have a plan, even if you don't get to stick to that plan, you're still going to be better off in the long run having that plan and being able to tweak that plan, rearrange that plan, and then move forward than if you didn't have that plan in the first place. Now, there are also a number of external challenges that make it seem really hard for you to create and then implement a plan. What I hear from my clients is that your clients want answers, right? They want answers and they want them really quickly. Your clients might be your external clients. They might be internal clients. So these are lawyers who you work with. These are your colleagues. They want answers. They need answers. There are deliverables that have short fused deadlines. Sometimes you have to reprioritize work. I get it. There's also that the work needs to be done, right? You've got work. There's lots of it. You can see for weeks ahead of you how you have a schedule that is just chock-a-block full. And again, you don't really want to take away time from spent working to schedule it, right? That seems like counterintuitive. You just want to dive right in. You might find that your work is cyclical in nature. So you might find you have these ebbs and flows where the busy periods are super busy and the quiet periods are super quiet. And how can you plan for that, right? How can you plan for a deal when the deal is just a function of the market? You don't know when it's going to come in and how that's going to go. There are going to be unexpected challenges that come up along the way. You have clients who email you with these last minute crises. You have true emergencies that pop up. And so how are you supposed to have a schedule that works in a practice like that? You might find that your days are sidetracked and hijacked by your inbox, the emails, they just keep coming in and you have this expectation that you want to respond to them right away. And so you end up responding to an email thread and next thing you know, you've lost your morning. You might find there are unexpected surprises that come up on files, right? Where this email comes in, something looks like it feels urgent. The client thinks it's urgent. And so you want to deal with it right away. They might also find that you have these shiny penny opportunities, right? You're working on file A and then there's news of file B that's coming in and you want to be really attentive to the prospective new client. You want to show that you're interested, that you're eager. So you start getting that all organized. And then there's, of course, life surprises. So if you've got young kids, for example, you might find that your child is supposed to go to daycare, but they can't because they have a fever and the daycare doesn't accept children who have a fever. You might find that you have a nanny, but your nanny had to call in sick, or maybe your nanny quits on you and now you're panicking, trying to find a new nanny, etc. These are all things that happen and they are all things that make it really, really hard for you and for many lawyers and for myself to keep to a particular schedule. And so what I'd offer though is that in addition to these external challenges, there are also internal challenges that make scheduling really, really challenging. And they're a lot harder to see, and they're not the challenges that you'll often hear people talking about. So one challenge that I notice among lawyers that I work with and that I've noticed in myself is sometimes, and for many, there may not be a clear goal that you are working towards that can make it harder to discern what belongs in your schedule and what to say no to. And you might find this is really driven by that fear of missing out. Now, when you don't have a specific direction, it may not be as clear how you should be allocating your time. And you don't want to say no to different opportunities because you feel like they could all lead you somewhere. And so you end up saying yes to pretty much everything. And then you end up overcommitting yourself. And what's driving this often is this scarcity mindset that if you don't say yes to this opportunity, that you're not going to have another opportunity to do something like this. And so you take on more and more, but not all of it aligns with what you want, what your interests are, what your values are, what your true priorities are. And with time, it can be difficult to conceptualize it because time isn't something that is necessarily tangible. You can't really see it. So I'd invite you to think about your closet, right? I am thinking about my closet right now, and it's long overdue for what do you call that? A curation, an edit. If you think about your closet, chances are there are items hanging in your closet that don't really belong there, right? Have you ever had that feeling where you've got a closet full of clothes and yet nothing to wear? I think about that suit that you bought several years ago. It never really looked great in the first place. You bought it on sale and it wasn't quite the right color, but it was good enough at the time. And yet, whenever it comes time to put on a suit, it's the one that you never choose. You think about it, but you never wear it. Or maybe you've got some beautiful sweaters. I know I've done this where I've bought really lovely sweaters. Maybe it's cashmere or wool and you think it's just gorgeous, but every time you put it on, it's itchy and it kind of gets all scratchy around your neck. And so you put it on, but then you're like, oh, I really don't want to spend the day scratching at my neck. And so you take the sweater and you put it back in the closet and maybe you spent a lot of money on it. And so you don't want to get rid of it. But as a result, you've got this closet and it's full, and yet there are these items in there that you're never going to wear. So it gives you this false sense of maybe it's abundance or having something, but truly, when you think about it, you don't actually have anything to wear. You're not wrong there. And so with your closet, it's easy to visualize. With your calendar, not so much. But I would invite you to start thinking about your schedule, your calendar, whatever that looks like in your mind's eye, and thinking about it in that more tangible way. And again, going back to this purpose question, this goal question, if you're not clear about where you're trying to go, then it's really hard to decide what items belong in your calendar. So that is one of the first internal challenges. Now, the second internal challenge is that you really want to please other people. And so you put their needs ahead of your own to your detriment. Now, we are in a service industry. You as a lawyer are in a service industry where your job is to help your clients. And when I ask my clients why they went to law school in the first place, the most common answer that I hear back is because you wanted to help people. You wanted to find a way to use the law to help people. And so chances are, if you're in this profession, there's something deep inside of you that wants to be helpful, that wants to be of service. And so in your practice, there's going to be a threshold where you are in service to your clients, and yet you remain in service to yourself enough to take care of yourself so that you can do this over the long haul, so that you can create a practice that is sustainable. And so where I see lawyers getting into trouble is where there's so much invested in service that they go beyond what is really manageable for them. So they serve beyond their capacity to their detriment. So what does this look like, tangibly speaking? Well, this might mean that you set yourself up for a particular day, you have the work that you want to focus on, and then those emails start popping in and you respond to them as they come in, every single one of them. And what is not happening is a filtering process, right? It's like, here's the year, I just want to get rid of it. I just want to make sure that person feels responded to, taken care of. And so what that does though, is that you then suffer at the end of the day because you haven't got your work done. And so that's one area, that's one challenge that lawyers will often struggle with. It might also mean taking on work without filters. Somebody asks you to do something, you want to be helpful, and so you say yes. When that project doesn't align, again, we're getting back into that first category of problems, right? Where you don't have that clear goal necessarily. And so you're taking things on. Here, the motivation might be more of that service goal. And what that ends up resulting in, though, is that you have this really overextended plate and you're constantly putting yourself in this position of taking on more than you really have capacity for. You might find also that you're doing those little extras, right? You're doing them off the clock, right? helping somebody out, just going that extra mile because you see that as a sign of your commitment, your way of showing to them that they matter, that you care, how committed you are, and yet you're overextending yourself, right? You might also find that you get into situations that compromise your priorities. So maybe you've got your kids' soccer game that you want to get to after school, and somebody comes into your office and they ask you to, just take on this one file, just help me out this one time. It'd be really, really great. The client really needs it. And so maybe you say yes and you end up missing your child's soccer game and then you feel terrible about it. So it might be that you're moving your priorities around to accommodate other people's requests. It might also be that your values get pulled into this, that you feel like you're being pulled out of integrity. And that is really a painful place to be. I have been there myself where I just feel like this does not feel right to me. And so you want to be careful there about where your desire to please others, where your desire to help others is not serving you, right? You've kind of crossed over that threshold of that ideal level, and now you're no longer where you want to be. And what I'd invite you to think about here is that not only is this taking away from your time, right? The actual time that you spend doing the thing that has been asked of you, but there's an additional compounding time, which is the time that you spend ruminating over the fact that you've overcommitted yourself. Maybe you feel resentment. Maybe you feel extra stress. Maybe you find yourself complaining to others. Maybe you don't have the feeling like you can go to the person who has created that for you or who has asked you to do the thing. Instead of dealing with the problem directly with that person, you deal with that problem by complaining to somebody else, right? Explaining the situation to your partner or explaining the situation to your assistant or a colleague. And so you're now investing more time dealing with that problem, processing that problem in addition to the time that you actually spend solving it. So that's the second internal challenge that you may experience, but you might not be talking about. And then the third area where I see a real internal struggle is confidence. And that is the confidence to set boundaries, including boundaries with others and also boundaries with yourself. And when your calendar is one where maybe you don't feel confident with what you're putting on there, and perhaps even more so, what you're taking off of your calendar, then that doesn't lead to you building greater confidence. What you will find is the opposite. As you start to have more confidence and create boundaries and say no and follow your schedule, you will actually start to build a greater sense of confidence, but you have to start doing it. And with confidence comes increased self-trust. So as you start planning and scheduling and deciding intentionally what it is that you want to do, where it is that you want to focus your time and energy, then you will follow through and you'll learn to trust yourself more. So if you find that you've created schedules, but then you don't stick to them, and so you want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, what I'm inviting you to do here is to think about, well, what happened there, right? And part of what may have been happening there is a breakdown of self-trust. Why bother creating a schedule if I'm not going to follow it anyways? Well, what if we had a schedule that you were able to adhere to, maybe not perfectly, because there are going to be surprises, there are going to be things that come up, but you adhere to it enough that you develop that trust that when you put something on your calendar, you're going to follow through and get it done. This can be really helpful, especially if maybe you procrastinate and you have developed a habit of not trusting yourself. You're not going to get things done. You're going to put it off. It's going to be on your calendar, not get done. So this is an opportunity for you to start redeveloping that skill, to put things on your calendar, to practice following through, to build that sense of trust. And I'd invite you here to think of yourself as placing a really high value on your time. I think for many lawyers, there's this idea of being all things to all people, to be that person who can help out in any situation, who can take on any emergency and solve it. And just ask yourself if that is where you want to be developing your relationship or your market, because when you get really good at something, when you get known for something, you tend to attract more of that. So is that the kind of situation that you want to be building more of? And if not, then maybe it's time to start rethinking how you manage your time and how you manage those situations. An analogy that might kind of resonate with you is this idea of, the 24/7 availability. You think of 7-Eleven or a 24-hour shop, whatever that is. they're there, they're providing a service and it's a good service. It can really come in handy when you're in a pinch. But I'd also invite you to think about that super exclusive high-end restaurant where you need to book months in advance and it's only open every second Thursday or whatever it happens to be, and how there's a certain demand and a willingness to operate on the boundaries and the schedule that is being proposed by that super exclusive restaurant because people want what that restaurant has to offer. There's a value there that isn't just convenience and yes, they will do the job. It's like they are going to do the job and they're going to do exceptionally well. And so I'd invite you to think about the value proposition that you're offering. And instead of it being, I'm available at all times and can answer any question in the middle of the night, whatever that happens to be, how else can you express your value proposition, the value that you're contributing to your clients and in the work that you do? So what I'm proposing then is when you learn to plan your weeks, you have an opportunity every single week to address these internal challenges, right? You get to be clear about where you're going. You get to practice the balance between pleasing people at your own expense and reaching that optimal level of service. And you have a chance to build your confidence around setting boundaries and choosing what you're doing on purpose and following through. Now, what you'll find, of course, is your days become your weeks become your months become your years, and over time your years, of course, become your life, right? We're looking at your practice, we're looking at your life outside of work, and this is important. This is your life, and we want you to be choosing exactly what it is that you put into your weeks. Now, when you decide what you want your work week to look like, or your week to look like inside and outside of work, you will also start to become much more aware of what it costs you when you put things on your calendar that you don't truly want to do, things that maybe are not in alignment with your goals, things that you're doing just because you don't want somebody to be upset with you. And what you'll also find then is when you have increased confidence about your direction, increased confidence and practice in terms of where to draw the line, you will start drawing your boundaries more intentionally. You'll start developing your confidence, and you'll start to become someone who can do that with greater ease. It will come more naturally and without apology. Now, I'm not saying that you won't apologize ever, but you won't necessarily feel like these are all things that you should be taking on and that there's something wrong with the fact that you are not taking it on. That's sort of what I mean there by without apology. It's that you have that sense of confidence, that sense of grace, that sense of purpose. And, I see it almost as this very elegant way of being able to conduct your weeks and draw the boundaries in a way that is respectful, in a way that is not unkind, but that shows that you value yourself, that you value your time, and you ultimately value the end goal, right? Which is often to provide the best service for your clients and to build your practice. So I've got 5 ideas here that I'd like to share with you that will help you to design the ideal week for you. These are practices that will address some of these challenges that you would face, the internal challenges, the external challenges, and it's a really practical way for you to go about planning your week. And what I'd invite you to think about is that this does not have to be something that you do perfectly. You can do this at 50%, 80%, whatever percent actually works for you, whatever you're capable of in any particular week. And the goal here isn't to do it perfectly. The goal here is to start developing a practice that works for you. So I'm going to offer 5 steps. And for each of these steps, I really invite you to think about how this resonates with you and how this would work in your specific practice. Another thing I'd like to mention is that you can start where you are. So if you have no system at all whatsoever, you're going to be starting at one place, right? You're going to be taking baby steps and putting little pieces into place, and you're going to build over time. And if you already have systems and you're already designing pretty amazing weeks, then you can think about what I'm offering here today and offer some tweaks, right? How can you dial things up? What are some systems that may have been working for you in the past that are no longer working, that maybe you need to adapt and evolve? So the idea here is really to take this information, take these ideas where you are right now and make them work for you. So the first thing that I recommend doing when it comes to creating the perfect week is to audit your time. This means looking at what you have been doing. Now you can look back over the last week. Maybe you can think about how you spent your day yesterday. Maybe you can look at how you spent your last month. And what I'm asking you to do here is to, on a fairly regular basis, just think about what you're doing. You can write it down. If you've got timesheets where you're recording your time, you can look at it that way. I keep a record every day of how I spend my day. I just jot down my time. I'm not billing my time. I just like to see where I'm spending my time, and I like to keep myself accountable. So I write it down at the end of the day. Sometimes I'll write down my wins. I used to be really disciplined about that. I've kind of fallen out of the habit. It's a great habit. I really would like to get back into it. But what I'm asking you to do here is just look at what is on your plate. What have you done recently? And ask yourself some filtering questions like, what is the value of the thing that I did in this particular day, right? So maybe you found that yesterday you spent a lot of time going back and forth on a tech problem. Maybe there's a tech thing that happened on your computer and you had to get IT involved, or maybe you don't have IT. Maybe you needed to do it yourself. Maybe there was a string of emails about an office party and are you going and what are you wearing? Maybe there was something that happened at school with your child that required your urgent attention, and so some time was spent there. So what are some of the things, and are these like high value? Are they low value activities that showed up on your calendar? I'd also invite you to think about effort, right? There are certain things that are going to be tasks that require a lot of effort and tasks that require a lot less effort. And does the effort justify or does the result, I should say, justify the effort that you expended? The other thing I'd ask you to audit is to look at things from an 80-20 perspective. You may have heard that expression. I think it's the Pareto principle, and it shows up in different ways. People will say, 80% of your revenue will come from 20% of your clients, or they'll say 80% of your problems will come from 20% of your clients. And so you might think about that sweet spot, right? There's that 80% that is going to be, worthwhile, that is high value. And then there's a 20% that is just not something that you need to be invested in, or it might be the vice versa. So look at the ratios. 80-20 is a really good ratio. Where are you kind of investing over time, right? It might be that 20% effort is all you really need to write an email that is updating a client. You don't need to spend the 80% where you're going into micro details. It wasn't really worth the time. Really, all they wanted were those bullet point highlights, and you can just do that. If you really need to get into the nitty gritty, you could have a phone call instead. So where are some of the 80-20 rules at play? Maybe you've got a client on your roster right now who is a really difficult client. Maybe they are calling you all the time. They have a lot of questions. They don't really seem to value your time. They don't really align. Maybe what they're asking you to do doesn't align with your regular practice. You're having to go out and do a bunch of additional research because it's not something that's in your strike zone. So ask yourself where you have these outliers, where you're kind of losing time because of that 80-20 rule. Now, what is going to happen when you start to audit yourself? Whether you're doing it in writing, whether you're doing it daily, weekly, monthly, just the act of reflecting on your tasks and trying to categorize them, high value, low value, high effort, low effort. Where does that 80-20 line draw in? What that's going to do is that's going to give you greater awareness. You're going to start to see over time where you want to prioritize. You're going to start to see examples of low value work, right? It might be a committee that you signed up for years ago and it's no longer aligned with you. Maybe you no longer have time for it. Maybe you've gone and started other projects. Maybe you've got young kids at home and your time is getting even more precious. You might find that there are email threads that go on forever that maybe you don't really need to be involved in. I talked about this before, but clients maybe who are draining you more than is reasonable. Maybe there's work that you're doing. Sometimes lawyers will take on, this low bono or pro bono or files that aren't necessarily compensating you to the point that you need to be compensated. You take them on, you feel like it's a worthy cause, but it really doesn't match up with your bottom line. You might find there are tasks that you've outgrown that you can be delegating, whether it's admin tasks or tasks on files that just no longer work for you. It might also be people that come in, they drop in unexpectedly, or every time you see them, they seem to have a problem that they want you to fix. Maybe it's certain activities like lunches that you may want to do occasionally, but you don't want to do them every single day. And maybe it's something that's happening outside of work, right? Maybe it's folding laundry, or you're in a book club that you no longer want to be a part of. And so I'm just inviting you to do that audit. Think of everything that you're doing and assigning a sense of priority or value to it. So that was step 1, is to audit your time. Step 2 is building on this audit, right? It's asking you to think about what it is that you do in a week. So here I'm going to ask you to think of the closet analogy once again, because it's a lot easier to imagine things that are tangible than it is to think about things that are a little bit more nebulous, such as time. And if you were to think about your closet, for example, and all the items that fit into your closet. Now, again, I'm going to my mind's eye. I'm picturing my closet. I've got like a closet organizer, which I love. So there's different ways I can hang things, right? There's like a low height hanger. There's a higher height hanger, hanging rack. I guess that's what you would call it. And then there's some shelves. And so, I like to have my suits hung up on the lower rack. And then I like to have long dresses go in the taller hanger rack. Then the sweaters go all folded and they go onto the shelves. And so you can see how I would like to organize my closet. And when I look at it, I can see all the items. I can see the dresses, the sweaters, the shoes, the jackets, the suits, the sweaters, everything that belongs inside of the closet. And so for you, you have your own closet. You can imagine all the things that go into your closet. And now, instead of thinking of your closet, I'd invite you to think of your calendar, right? Maybe it's an Outlook calendar, maybe it's a paper calendar, but what are the things that would go into it? So if you think of the tasks that you do day to day, well, what are some items? Well, maybe they're meetings, right? It might be meetings that you have with clients. It's billable work. Maybe it's meetings that you are having with your partners. It's a partnership meeting. It's maybe the leadership of your group. You're meeting to talk about the makeup of the group, where you're going, new files that are coming in. Maybe you've got practice group meetings. You get your whole team together and you discuss updates in the law. So meetings, those might be some items, right? Items that show up on your calendar. You may have consult calls with new clients and the file opening process. You have your billable work, right? We talked about meetings, but you've also got drafting and hearings and research and negotiating and phone calls. You have business development. Maybe those are lunches that you're having with clients or new clients. There are events that you're attending. There are presentations that you're preparing for, papers that you're writing. There's docketing your time. Every day you may be spending some time docketing your time. You may be invoicing. You have admin tasks, HR tasks. You're planning. You've decided that you want to plan your week. So you've got time every week where you're doing your weekly plan. You've got daily time allocated to update your plan, to review what you're doing in a day, to update if you need to. I will often have periods in my day where I'm re-checking in with myself. So I've got my plan for the day, and then I've got a burst of activity that I want to do. Let's say I've got 5 different emails that I'm about to write. So I'll write the names of the people that I'm writing my emails to so that I can check them off. That helps me to stay focused, to stay on track. Again, what are the items on your desk? Mentoring, hiring, firing. So you just want to get a very granular list of all the things you're doing at work. You might also include things you're doing outside of work, whether it's cooking and meal prep, sleep, commuting, exercise, family time, friend time, fun, travel, whatever. So you just want to get a sense of all the items. And you might think about your closet. And if you were to take everything from your closet and dump it on the bed so that you could sort through it, this is kind of what we're doing here. We're just taking all the items and we're plunking them somewhere, whether it's on a sheet of paper, whether you're just doing this mentally. But the idea here is just to gather up what are all the things so that when you put them back in the calendar, you can do it in the most effective way possible. Now, when it comes to thinking about the nature of the tasks, some of them are going to be scheduled for you, right? If you are a litigator and you've got hearings, those dates are set and they go on your calendar. If there are closings, you're a deal lawyer and there's a certain date by which things need to happen, that goes on your calendar. So you might think of all the deadlines that would go in there. So if there's deadlines leading up to those events, other deadlines that are created by agreement with your clients, with your colleagues. You may have submissions that you need to submit, file with the court. You've got client reports that you're sending out. You might have examinations for discovery or depositions. You have meetings, etc. So when it comes to the actual task itself, some of them will be pinpointed in time. Others are a lot more fluid, right? So if you think about reports that don't have a particular deadline, now I'd encourage you to put a deadline on them, but they may not have an actual deadline. You might have admin work that kind of goes from week to week, that there's no specific day by which you need to do it. Business development is a good example of something that it's one of those things that you do on an ongoing basis, but it's not necessarily something that has a tangible date. If you're writing a check-in email to a client, for example, there's nobody holding you to a certain day by which you need to do it. Maybe you're working on a really large project or you're updating your precedent system. These are things that maybe you're doing, but it doesn't have a clear deadline. And professional development, of course, right? Your professional development, your ongoing training, that is something that you commit to. And yes, maybe you have trainings that then have deadlines, but unless you're driving it, nobody else is setting that for you. So what this inventory process allows you to do is it allows you to take the items and organize your schedule more efficiently. So again, think of that closet. You want the pants hanging all together. Maybe you want to color code them. You want your suits to be pressed and ready to go. You want to remove all the clothing that you never are going to wear, those scratchy sweaters. You can donate them, give them to somebody who doesn't have the same allergy or whatever that is. So we want to be intentional. So that's item 2. And that's a pretty big one, right? That's really identifying what are the items that go on your calendar. And then 3, and this is where we get to the fun part. This is where we're really designing that ideal week, is we want to schedule your week proactively, right? And so what I would suggest here is just getting into that practice. At first, it's going to be really just a week to week thing, right? It's going to be kind of reinventing the wheel every time. You're going to be figuring out your process. You're going to be figuring out what a schedule actually looks like for you. And it may be that there's a lot of differences when you flow from week to week. And what I would contrast that against is when you develop this practice, when you start to see patterns, when you start to see what happens week to week, month to month, then you might start blocking things in more in advance. And I'm going to get to that in a minute, but there will be a shift, right? If you're really reactive right now, then you might be planning a little bit reactively as well. Versus once you start to refine your system, you might find that there's even more of a proactive scheduling. So you might find that you start designated certain days for certain activities. You're able to put more predictability into your schedule. But at the very beginning, I wouldn't hold yourself to the standard of having everything be perfect and all proactive. Really, you just want to get into that habit of planning your weeks. So patterns that you might start to see over time, and this is something that is, I can speak personally in terms of my practice, is that I've noticed that there are certain things that happen week to week. And so now I've scheduled my weeks to match that. So for me, Monday is a day where I spend the morning focused on admin, because what I noticed was that every Monday I would start my week. I would have a lot of admin left over from, things that were coming with my children, emails that came in from the schools, from organizing activities for them. That was one brand of admin. Also, just me planning my week, setting up my schedule for the week, maybe confirming appointments with people, seeing what items on my to-do list there were that maybe hadn't been done the weeks before, etc. So giving yourself time for admin. I like to reserve Tuesdays for some of the contract work that I do, where I know it's ongoing. There are ongoing projects. There are meetings. I schedule those on Tuesdays. Wednesdays for me are podcast days, where I do all things podcast and newsletter related. And Thursdays and Fridays, I try to have coaching appointments primarily, and sometimes speaking engagements. And so what I have done there is my schedule has gone from, just sort of putting things in where I could fit them in, to now being more intentional about how I want to have each week structured. So this is something that I've implemented relatively recently. I've been planning for years, but you might find that there's a certain cadence to your week. Obviously, it'll look different from my week, but you might schedule an appointment or a meeting with your assistant every Tuesday afternoon, because that's a good time to catch up and deal with non-urgent matters, make sure that everything's on track. Maybe you've got a team that you're working with right now on a big mandate, and so maybe you schedule in a weekly meeting with them. So you might just start to think about where you're going to slot things in. And at the beginning, what we're really focused on is just sitting down every week and creating a schedule. So I recommend doing that on a Sunday afternoon, or a Monday morning, whatever works best for you. Clients that I've worked with do a mix of this. Sometimes they like to do it on the weekend. Sometimes they like to do it first thing Monday. Maybe they'll get to the office a little bit earlier in order to accommodate it. Again, just having this weekly check-in with yourself is such a game changer if you're not already doing it. Sometimes also, I should add, you may want to include your partner. If you've got a family, you've got kids, you've got different activities, your partner maybe is also a busy professional. And so you're trying to coordinate pickups and drop-offs and who does what and who's making dinner when. So you may want your scheduling to be something that you do with your partner or maybe even your assistant, right? If you're really reliant on your assistant, maybe it's a Monday morning thing. You do that first draft and then you sit with your assistant and say, here's what we've got on our agenda for the week. So anyhow, weekly, Sunday or Monday would be my recommendation. Now, when it comes to actually planning your perfect week, you can do it on paper. You can do it electronically. I like paper. I like to have a day planner. I have clients who I've worked with who love just going out and getting the perfect day timer for them. The perfect day timer that I have for myself is one that shows me every single week so that I know I can see at a glance each week. I can put my appointments in there. I like those little monthly calendars to be on my planner so I can see exactly what the months look like, what days fall on which number of the month, etc. So pick something that works for you. I've had clients who liked to use cue cards. I have clients who like to have purely electronic. They like to have ways of other people being able to see their calendar. Clients who have a mix of different electronic versus paper. There is no right way. The best way is whatever's going to work for you. And the way you know it's working is if things actually are getting done. And there was a coach I was listening to the other day talking about time management, and she was adamant about not having anything on paper, that it was so much less efficient to write things down relative to having it on an electronic calendar where you can just move things around or keep an electronic list. You can delete things, move them around. And yes, I absolutely see the efficiency in having things electronically gathered, but there's also something to be said about the physical act of writing and how that internalizes and almost programs you to execute on a certain task. When people write their goals down, for example, they are much more likely to follow through on them. So if you find you've got reminders and they're popping up and it's like you don't even see them anymore, that's probably not a very good system. So you might try something that's a little bit more tactile. Now, the next thing that you're going to want to do is to plan strategically. So I recommend here looking at your energy levels, right? Where do you have the greatest energy in the day? If it's the morning, you probably want to put your thinking tasks in the morning. And if you're tired in the afternoons, then maybe you want to put things that don't require the same mental energy, like phone calls, meetings, responding to emails, admin tasks. Maybe all that goes in the afternoon. So you're going to want to think about that. And I've got a podcast episode. It's episode number 2. It's all about time management strategies for lawyers. I go through all of these. So you can go back to that episode and I do that in more detail. And I also have a brand new podcast roadmap specifically for time management, which I'll talk about a little bit more just as I wrap up the episode. But I highly encourage you to check that out as well, because it's an opportunity to go really deep on time management, which really is the fundamental building block for creating really everything that you want in your practice and in your life. I think time management is one of the skills that we can most benefit from when it comes to creating an ideal week and, frankly, an ideal life. So again, some of the things you're going to want to plan strategically when you're looking at your ideal week is what are some of the anchors? What are the things that happen every day that you can use as anchors for other activities? So that might be showing up at the office. You do that every day, eating lunch. Maybe you go for an afternoon walk. You go home every day. So fill your anchors in and plan around them. You want to be strategic about how you plan your tasks. So again, that deep thinking, where does that go? Maybe you need to come into the office a little bit earlier, because what clients will often talk about is not being able to do certain deep thinking assignments because they're getting a lot of emails. It's really disruptive. So figure out times that might work better for you. For some of my clients who have kids at home where their work days are cut short because they have to go and relieve the nanny, pick the kids up from daycare. And so they aren't able to do that long project, that really deep thinking, whether it's drafting, whether it's research, whether it's just finishing something that takes a number of hours, you might give yourself a day or two where you work longer at the office. I have done that in the past. I still do that on Fridays because I don't have any pickup responsibilities that day. And I have clients who designate a day, right? They stay at the office, they treat themselves to a nice takeout, maybe they go to a yoga class, and then they assign that as a longer day work so that you've got that day of the week to look forward to. Everybody knows that that's your day to stay late at the office. You can build your routines around it. You might also think about how to use weekends, right? You might not want to spend the whole weekend working, but maybe you can have a 2-hour window in there where you work on some spillover work that didn't get done during the week. And again, you might think about how to be more efficient, whether that means batching emails. So if you've got those emails that are coming in, they're not particularly urgent, you can move those to a time of day. Maybe it's 3 p.m, where you're going to be dealing with them. So you can kind of look at them, decide whether or not they do need that immediate response. And if not, that person can wait. What I also invite you to do when it comes to scheduling your week is make sure that you've got your me time in there. This is your fitness, your health, your doctor's appointments, your physio appointments, whatever it happens to be. We really need you engaging in self-care, time with family and with friends. We want you to schedule that time into your calendar so that you follow through on it. And I'd also invite you to think about where you might add in time to make social connections. And I know that for me, this has been a real challenge, especially in the post-pandemic era, especially because I work from home. If I'm not intentional about meeting up with people during the week, whether it's having a lunch, whether it is going for a walk and talking to a friend at the same time, whether it is doing something like scheduling a dinner on the weekends, even with girlfriends, I would invite you to really be intentional about putting those social connections on your calendar because it's really easy not to prioritize them otherwise. And what you'll find as well is that over time, you may not need to schedule these things quite as much. So for myself, I've got a pretty comprehensive morning routine. It's not that I'm a morning person. It's just that morning was the time of day that nobody else really seemed to want something of me, right? Like my kids are sleeping, my husband's sleeping, or he leaves early for work. And so there was this window of time. And so I use that time to exercise, shower, journal, plan my day, and get started working. And it's a really lovely and peaceful time for me because it's just this quiet time. So what in your schedule, what pockets are there that can be time that is just your time? Now, that was step 3. So step 4 and 5 we'll go through relatively quickly because they are easy to explain. Number 1 is just a reality check, right? So once you go through planning your week, I just invite you to review it, right? And are you getting the things done that you want to get done? Are your main goals on your schedule? Are you getting the tasks done, the projects finished? Have you scheduled enough time to meet your targets if you're working with billable hours? Have you identified where you've got deadlines that are fixed deadlines versus maybe some more flexible deadlines? And where you have flexible deadlines, you might have those as the things that you move around a little bit more. And you might also notice what's getting pushed week to week. So when you start doing this regularly, you might have some usual suspects that keep showing up week after week. You might decide whether you need to heighten the priority on them or delegate them, or maybe even decide not to do them at all. That's step 4, your reality check. And then finally, step 5 is just to adapt. So you will get interrupted. Your schedule is going to get thrown off. Your practice is going to change over time. You will fall out of habit. And what I invite you to do is to not view that as a failure or a sign that scheduling doesn't work. It is just a sign that you get to continue to adapt your practice as your practice itself evolves. So we want you to evaluate, see what's working in your scheduling. That might be planning in advance. It might be that time that you have to reflect. Look at what's not working. So maybe your way of dealing with emails is reactive. Maybe you have a really hard time turning yourself off at night. And so then you can start troubleshooting solutions. So let's say you're really good at planning, you're not so great with emails or separating yourself from work. Well, you might plan to have a 20-minute window every evening where you deal with emails, and maybe you write yourself a little to-do note about how you're going to get to those emails first thing in the morning, whatever that looks like for you. And as much as possible, as you develop this process, I invite you to follow through, because that's really developing that muscle with yourself, developing that trust with yourself that you are the kind of person who can create a schedule in advance and then follow through on it. So in summary, we're going to do an audit of your time. You're going to identify the task items that show up for you week to week. You're going to schedule your weeks in advance. You are going to do a reality check when you look at that schedule, and also, are you doing what you want and need to be doing? And then finally, you'll adapt your schedule as you go. And what you'll notice over time is that by going through this process, you focus more on the things that are aligned and that serve you, and less on the things that don't. It'll become a lot easier for you to be discerning in terms of how you spend your time, so you can tighten up those intake calls. You might spend less time on emails. You'll be more clear in your boundaries because you'll know what it is that you are trading off in terms of time. So it might be easier for you to have those conversations. You will get better at expressing your boundaries. You'll develop greater confidence in terms of your ability to get more done. You'll have more proof of that. At a broader level as well, you'll notice that you feel less stressed and more in control, right? It no longer seems like there's too much to do. It no longer feels quite so overwhelming. Yes, you'll have periods that may feel like that, but you'll also have systems to deal with that. You'll be able to navigate other people's needs with professionalism, but without necessarily taking on their sense of urgency. Some people may come to you and to them it seems really urgent, and it's not urgent, and you'll have the confidence to respond to them in a way that lets them know that you're dealing with it and everything is going to be okay. And here's a timeline that this is going to take place. And you'll have the confidence that you can deal with interruptions and unexpected challenges and unexpected opportunities and true emergencies, which you'll find are likely reducing in number with greater peace and calm. So you'll need a few skills: a willingness to develop a new habit, developing your planning skills. You'll need to learn to trust yourself, to make the plan and then stick to it. And then finally, that willingness to be flexible and adapt going forward. Now, this podcast episode turned out to be, speaking of time management, a little longer than I had anticipated. And I'm so glad that you've joined me for it and that you've managed to stick with me here. I think this is one of those planning processes that it really does pay dividends. And I'm so glad you're here with me and that you're focused on creating, those ideal weeks for yourself. As I mentioned a moment ago, I have a brand new outline. It's a podcast roadmap that goes through all the different time management episodes that I have recorded over the course of this podcast. There are quite a few of them, and some of them are a little bit like this one. They're more tactical. Here's some strategies. And there's also podcast episodes that go deeper, that address your relationship with time, whether you've got a time scarcity concept and you want to see time more abundantly. There's also time management episodes that function on your executive functioning skills, so they focus on your executive functioning skills. So episodes that help you understand what's going on in your brain when you have trouble getting motivated or initiating a task, staying focused and following through. So that can really help you there. And then I have a number of episodes that go deep on procrastination, because that's an area where a lot of my clients struggle. Even clients who are highly motivated, who are highly productive, who are doing excellent work, procrastination can sometimes be a real challenge. So thank you for joining me in this week's podcast episode. You have worked really hard. I hope that these tips are helpful for you and that you now feel ready to go out and plan your weeks in a way that aligns with exactly what you want, and that you have the skills to adapt when things don't always go exactly as planned. It has been a pleasure. I wish you a beautiful week. If you want individual support, of course, to implement some of these strategies, to design those ideal weeks, by all means, please do feel free to reach out and connect with me. I would love to hear from you. That is all for now, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Bye for now. If you enjoyed today's show and don't want to miss an episode, subscribe and follow the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you haven't already, please leave a rating and review. Your feedback will help me create a podcast that's tailored to your needs and goes straight to the heart of what matters to you. For instructions on how to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com/podcast launch. See you next time. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. If you want more information, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com. See you next week.